The family reunion was supposed to be a joyous occasion, filled with laughter and the comfort of being surrounded by loved ones. But for Emily, it felt like the opposite. It was suffocating. The voices, the chatter, the clinking of glasses, it all seemed to blur into one long, agonizing noise. And then it happened. Her father, without warning, stood up from his chair, his face twisted with disdain. "You've always been selfish," he spat, his voice cold and unforgiving. Emily's heart sank as the room grew silent, every eye turning towards her. "Your sister deserved that suit more at the table," he added, his words cutting through the air with sharp precision. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze. Her sister, sitting at the opposite end of the table, glanced at Emily, an almost smug expression on her face. Emily's hands trembled, but she held herself together. The sting of his words wasn't new. She had heard them 1,000 times before. It wasn't just about the suit. It was the years of being overlooked, of being made to feel like she wasn't good enough, that she wasn't deserving. But this time it felt different. This time, Emily didn't feel the rush of anger or the burning desire to scream back. This time, she felt a quiet resolve stir within her. She had always been the one to keep her feelings bottled up, to suffer in silence. She had endured all these years of neglect, of trying to please people who would never be pleased. Her father's words rang in her ears, louder than anything else. "Selfish!" The word echoed in her mind, like a song she couldn't escape. For a brief moment, she wanted to fight back. She wanted to shout at him, to remind him of all the sacrifices she had made, all the time she had put her family's needs ahead of her own. But she knew it wouldn't matter. It never did. Instead, Emily remained silent. She didn't yell. She didn't beg for understanding. She simply sat there, allowing the pain to wash over her, allowing the tears to burn in her eyes, but refusing to let them fall. She knew that the battle wasn't going to be won in this room. Her father turned back to the rest of the family, not even acknowledging the weight of what he had just said. The silence in the room was deafening. Emily could feel the eyes of her relatives on her, judging her, waiting for her to react. But she didn't. She didn't give them the satisfaction. As the night wore on, Emily's mind raced. She couldn't go back to the way things had been. She couldn't let this moment pass by like all the others. This was it, the breaking point. The moment she realized she wasn't going to beg for love or respect anymore. She was done being the invisible daughter, the one who always took a back seat while everyone else got what they wanted. And so she made a silent vow. This time things would change. She didn't need to shout or scream to make her point. All she needed was to stop giving. She didn't need their approval anymore. Emily knew exactly what she had to do, and it would start with walking away from this family reunion with a sense of finality. She would take control of her life on her terms. Later that night, when everyone had left and the house was eerily quiet, Emily sat in the corner of her bedroom, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. Her mind replayed the scene over and over. Her father's words, his cold eyes, they haunted her. The emotional sting was sharp, but it was not unfamiliar. This wasn't the first time he had made her feel small, insignificant. She had grown up in this house, always living in the shadows of her sister's achievements, always the one who was overlooked. The more she tried to please her father, the more she tried to be the perfect daughter, the more he rejected her. It was like she could never measure up, no matter how hard she worked, no matter how much she sacrificed. But tonight was different. Emily could feel it deep inside her, an unshakable truth that she had been too afraid to face until now. She had been living for other people's approval, constantly trying to prove herself to a family that would never appreciate her for who she truly was. She closed her eyes and thought back to the countless times she had been told to sit down and shut up when she spoke her mind, the way her father had dismissed her ambitions, always favoring her sister's life decisions. Even when Emily had succeeded, even when she had gone above and beyond, her father never once acknowledged her efforts the way he did with her sister. For years, she had tried to gain her father's affection. She had worked hard, built a career, sacrificed her own dreams to make him proud. But it had never been enough. She had been giving and giving, and in return, she had been treated like an afterthought. The worst part was, she had let it happen. She had allowed herself to be trapped in this cycle of trying to please them, trying to win their love. But tonight, something had shifted. She wasn't going to beg for love anymore. She didn't need their validation. She didn't need her father's approval. What she needed was to finally take control of her own life. Emily sat there, her hands gripping the edge of the chair. She thought about all the things she had worked for, her house, her car, the career she had built from the ground up, and she realized that she had been handing it all away to a family who didn't deserve it. They had taken it for granted, used it as a means to control her, to make her feel indebted to them. But she wasn't going to play that game anymore. The decision was clear in her mind now. It was time to stop being the doormat, the one who always gave and never received. She was done being the daughter who constantly forgave, the one who accepted the scraps of love they threw her way. She wasn't going to beg for their respect or their approval anymore. It was time for a change. Emily had made her choice. She wasn't going to be the weak, silent one anymore. It was time to show them what it meant to lose someone like her. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow on the room. Emily stood in front of the mirror, looking at her reflection. She looked different. Her eyes weren't filled with the same sadness they had carried for years. There was a quiet determination in them now, a calm resolve that hadn't been there before. She knew what she had to do. The thought had settled in her mind the night before, and had only grown clearer with every passing hour. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that this wasn't just about the incident at the table or her father's hurtful words. This was about reclaiming her life. She couldn't keep living in the shadow of their expectations, constantly sacrificing her own happiness to make them proud. She had built a successful career. She owned a beautiful house. She had a car she loved. But they had taken it all for granted. They had used her generosity and kindness as a way to control her, to make her feel guilty for having things they didn't. But Emily was done. She wasn't going to throw a tantrum or yell. She wasn't going to make a scene. That was the old Emily, the one who always tried to please everyone. This time she was going to take back what was hers, quietly, calmly, and without any apologies. She made a call to her lawyer, the one she had been putting off for years. She arranged to have the house and car transferred into her name, made sure the credit cards were canceled, and everything she had allowed her family to use was now taken back. Her father had made a fatal mistake when he assumed he could keep pushing her around, keep making her feel like she wasn't enough. But Emily wasn't that girl anymore. She wasn't the one who begged for their love. She knew what she had to do, and she was going to do it. She was going to take back her power, and she wasn't going to let anyone make her feel small ever again. The day began like any other, but Emily could feel the weight of her decision pressing down on her. Her hands trembled slightly as she sipped her coffee, but the unease was nothing compared to the quiet strength she now felt within herself. Today wasn't just any ordinary day. It was the day she would take back what was hers. By noon, everything was set in motion. Her lawyer had already completed the paperwork, and within a few hours the house, the car, and the credit cards that had once been so casually handed over to her family would be hers once again. She couldn't help but smile, just a little, as she thought about how easily they had taken everything for granted. The feeling of control was foreign to her. She had never been the type to stand up for herself, never the type to assert her needs. But today, as she walked out the door and into the world she had created for herself, she realized just how much she had grown. This was no longer the same person who had endured years of disrespect and neglect. No, today she was someone different, someone who had learned that silence and dignity could be a powerful form of revenge. As she pulled into her driveway later that afternoon, the weight of her actions finally hit her. The house was quiet, empty of her family's voices for the first time in what felt like forever. It was hers now. No one could take it from her. No one could tell her what to do with it. The house that had once been a symbol of her sacrifice was now a symbol of her freedom. Emily stood at the door, her hand resting on the handle, and took a deep breath. The world outside seemed still, almost as if it were holding its breath along with her. She had done it. She had taken back everything that had been rightfully hers, and in doing so, she had reclaimed her power. The door opened, and she stepped inside, her eyes scanning the familiar walls. This house was no longer just a place to sleep or to exist. It was now a reflection of the woman she had become. It was a place where she would no longer have to hide her true self, a place where she could finally be free. Her phone buzzed, and she knew it was only a matter of time before her family would reach out. Her father, her sister, they would come looking for answers. They would demand an explanation. But Emily wasn't afraid. She wasn't scared of their anger or their disappointment. She had already made her decision, and there was no turning back now. She walked over to the living room, her steps firm, resolute. The silence that had settled in the house felt peaceful to her. It was the calm before the storm. Her family would come, of that she was sure. But they would come to find a different woman standing in front of them. A woman who had finally found her voice, who had finally learned to put herself first. The knock at the door came exactly as Emily had expected. It was her father, with her sister trailing behind him like a shadow. The moment she opened the door, Emily could see the fury in her father's eyes. The anger that had always been there, just beneath the surface, was now bubbling to the top. Her sister's face was painted with confusion and disbelief, but Emily knew this wasn't about them. It was about her, and how she had broken free from the cycle they had trapped her in. "Where is it?" her father demanded, his voice harsh and demanding. "Where's the car? The house? What have you done?" Emily stood still, the weight of his words hitting her, but not with the force they once would have. She didn't flinch. She didn't feel the need to defend herself. She had already made her decision, and no amount of shouting or guilt-tripping would change that. "I've taken it back," Emily replied quietly, her voice steady, though her father's fury was palpable. "Everything that's mine, my house, my car, everything I've worked for, is now under my control. You don't get to take that from me anymore." Her father's face turned red with rage. "You're being ridiculous," he spat, his fists clenched by his sides. "You're throwing it all away for what? A little bit of pride? You think you can just walk away from your family like this? You're throwing your entire life away." Emily looked at him, her gaze unwavering. "I've been throwing my life away for years, letting you control me, letting you make me feel like I wasn't enough. But not anymore. I've had enough. You're not going to manipulate me anymore. I'm done being your pawn." Her father stepped forward, his anger turning into something darker. "You're being selfish. You'll regret this. You think you're better than us now? Just wait until you see what happens when you try to do it alone. You'll fail. You'll see that we were right all along." Emily didn't move. She stood her ground, the silence between them hanging heavy in the air. It wasn't the kind of confrontation she had imagined. She didn't need to scream or cry. She didn't need to beg for his approval. All she had to do was stand there and let her silence speak for itself. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of their breathing, the tension in the room thick and suffocating. And then, without another word, her father turned on his heel, storming out of the house, with her sister following close behind, a confused look still plastered on her face. As the door slammed shut behind them, Emily let out a breath she didn't know she had been holding. It was over. The confrontation had been ugly, but it had been necessary. The fallout from her decision would be felt for a long time. But Emily was no longer afraid of the consequences. She had taken back her power, and she was ready to face whatever came next. The days that followed the confrontation were quiet. The house, which had once felt so full of tension, now felt oddly peaceful. Emily spent most of her time at home, reflecting on everything that had led up to this moment. It It wasn't just the anger or the sudden declaration to take back what was hers. It was the years of silence, the years of being treated like less than she was, the years of watching her family treat her as an afterthought. Sitting in the living room, Emily ran her fingers over the cold surface of the coffee table. The same coffee table she had sat at countless times, listening to her father's harsh words, her sister's passive-aggressive comments, always feeling like an outsider in her own life. It was as if everything she had done had been overshadowed by the idea that she wasn't good enough, that she wasn't worthy of respect or love. She closed her eyes and remembered the first time she had stepped into this house. It had been with so much hope, so many dreams. She had imagined a life where she could be herself, where she didn't have to hide behind a mask of compliance. But over the years, the house had turned into a prison, a place where she had been held captive by the expectations of others. The truth was, she had always tried to meet those expectations, always trying to prove her worth, always trying to show that she was enough. But no matter how hard she tried, it had never been enough for them. Her father had never seen her as anything other than a disappointment, and her sister had always viewed her as competition. There was no room for Emily in their world, and she had spent so much of her life trying to fit into a mold that was never meant for her. The anger had come in waves, at first consuming her thoughts, then giving way to a quiet sadness. But now, as she sat alone in the silence of her house, she realized something crucial. The anger had been necessary, but it wasn't what defined her anymore. She was no longer the victim of her family's expectations. She was the woman who had taken back her life, piece by piece, with nothing but her quiet dignity to guide her. She had made mistakes, sure. She had let herself be manipulated for far too long, and she had stayed silent when she should have spoken up. But now, she saw that all of those mistakes had shaped her into the person she was becoming. A person who didn't need validation from anyone else. A person who could stand alone and still be whole. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Emily wasn't surprised when she opened it to find her best friend, Sarah, standing on the other side. Sarah's face was filled with concern, but there was also a glimmer of pride in her eyes. She had been one of the few people who had supported Emily through everything, who had encouraged her to stand up for herself when no one else would. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked gently, her voice laced with care. Emily smiled, her eyes bright with a newfound sense of peace. "I'm more than okay, Sarah. I think I'm finally starting to understand who I am, and who I'm not." Sarah stepped inside, and they sat together on the couch. Emily told her everything. The confrontation with her father, the aftermath, the peace she was starting to feel. It wasn't easy to admit that she had been afraid for so long, but saying it aloud made the fear seem smaller, more manageable. "I'm proud of you," Sarah said quietly. "You've come a long way, and you deserve this peace. You deserve to be happy." Emily's heart swelled at the words, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe them. She didn't need her father's approval or her sister's love. She didn't need anyone to tell her she was worthy. She already knew. It wasn't long before the family came back into the picture. Emily knew they would. The question was no longer whether they would show up, but what they would say when they did. The doorbell rang late one evening, and Emily could feel the familiar tension creeping into her chest. But this time it was different. She wasn't afraid. Her father stood on the other side of the door, his face a mixture of anger and desperation. He didn't bother with pleasantries, nor did he wait for her to invite him in. He stepped forward, his voice harsh as he demanded, "What do you think you're doing, Emily? You think you can just take everything from us and walk away? You can't do this. We're family." The words were the same as before, but this time they didn't have the same power over her. Emily stood tall, her posture firm, her expression calm. "I didn't take anything from you, Dad. Everything I took back was mine to begin with. I've been giving for so long, and all I've gotten in return is disrespect. I'm done with that." Her father's face twisted with frustration, his hands trembling at his sides. "You think you're better than us, don't you? You think you can just cut us off and live your life without consequences?" Emily's gaze didn't waver. "I'm not cutting you off. I'm just cutting out the toxicity. There's a difference. I've been carrying your weight for far too long. It's time for me to live for myself." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken words. Her father stood there, his mouth agape, as though he couldn't comprehend what she was saying. Her sister was behind him, but she didn't speak. She never did. Emily could see the judgment in her eyes, the same judgment that had been there all those years. "Why?" her father finally asked, his voice quieter now, almost defeated. "Why do this? After everything we've been through? I'm your father. I raised you." Emily's eyes softened, but there was no hesitation in her voice. "You didn't raise me, Dad. You raised a version of me that you could control. But I'm not that person anymore." With that, she turned away, leaving her father standing in the doorway, speechless. After the confrontation, Emily felt lighter than she had in years. She had spoken her truth, and it had come out effortlessly. There was no anger behind her words, no bitterness in her tone. It was simply the truth, a truth that had been buried deep inside her for far too long. Her father had left without a word, and for the first time, Emily didn't feel the need to chase after him. She didn't need to explain herself any further. It wasn't about winning an argument. It was about reclaiming herself, reclaiming her life, her happiness, and her sense of worth. In the days that followed, Emily focused on herself. She immersed herself in work, putting the business back on track and pushing it to new heights. There was satisfaction in seeing something grow that she had built from the ground up, without the shadow of her family looming over it. She had put in the hard work, the late nights, the sacrifices, and it was finally paying off. Her friends, like Sarah, continued to support her. But now Emily found herself spending more time with people who valued her, who appreciated her for who she was, not for what she could give them or what they could take from her. It felt like a fresh start, like the beginning of something new. Her family's attempts to contact her were met with silence. She had nothing more to give. The calls, the texts, the letters, they were all ignored. They had made their choices, and Emily had made hers. She wasn't angry anymore. In fact, she almost felt sorry for them. They had lived their lives with such bitterness, with so much anger and greed. She could only hope they found their own peace one day. One evening, as Emily was sitting in her living room, she received a letter. It was from her father. At first, she considered throwing it away, but then something inside her urged her to open it. The letter was short. It wasn't filled with apologies or pleas for forgiveness. It wasn't even an admission of wrongdoing. Instead, it was a simple acknowledgement. "I've been selfish, Emily. I've never truly understood you, but I'm trying now. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope one day you will." Emily placed the letter on the coffee table, her fingers lingering on the paper for a moment. She didn't feel the rush of triumph she thought she would. Instead, she felt a quiet sadness. The person she had wanted her father to be didn't exist, but the person she had become, strong, independent, at peace, was more than enough. For the first time in her life, Emily realized that her happiness didn't depend on the approval of others. She was free to live her life on her terms, without guilt or fear of judgment. She had taken back everything that had been hers, and more importantly, she had taken back her own power. As the sun set outside, casting a soft glow across her living room, Emily allowed herself to relax. She had fought a hard battle, but now she was at peace. She had made it through the storm, and she was stronger for it. And while she didn't know what the future would bring, she knew one thing for certain. She would face it with courage, with grace, and with the quiet strength that came from standing up for herself, no matter the cost. As Emily reflected on everything that had happened, she realized the most important lesson. True strength lies in knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone diminish it. It wasn't the loud confrontations or the dramatic moments that defined her growth, but the quiet, steady resolve to live life on her own terms, regardless of the expectations placed on her. She had walked away from years of being manipulated, and in doing so had finally taken back control of her life, her happiness, and her future. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply showing up as the person you were always meant to be, without apologies. She didn't need validation from anyone, not even from the people who had hurt her the most. And in that silence there was strength. To anyone facing similar struggles, remember, you are worthy of peace, happiness, and respect. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. Your silence, your growth, and your choices speak louder than any words ever could. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring tales of strength, transformation, and the power of quiet revenge. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What's the one thing you've learned about standing up for yourself in a world that often tries to break you? Stay strong, and never forget that your worth is immeasurable